and two sons, who were from Bethlehem and Judah, set out on a hunt for food due to a famine in their city. Mm-hmm. They ended up in a country of Moab. Mm-hmm. This was a pagan town. They had their own religion. They had their own ways that were different from our God. Mm-hmm. They stayed there for about 10 years. While there, the wife, Naomi, lost her husband, Elimelech. So she was left, her and her two sons, here in this Moab, or in the Moabite city, where they took on two wives, two Moabite women. Good God. And they said one was Ruth and one was Orpah. Then her sons died. So Naomi and her two daughters-in-law set out to go back to Bethlehem. While on the journey, Naomi told the girls to go back home to their families, for she was old and didn't have any more sons for them. If she was to have any sons, who was going to wait for them to be of age, because they would be old. Ruth refused to leave Naomi, and Orpah got a blessing from her mother-in-law, and she kissed her, and she went on home. Ruth was very loyal to stay with Naomi. Once in Bethlehem, Naomi went out to work and came across a man named Boaz, as they labeled him a noble man. He was a close relative to Naomi. As they say, he was the redeemer of their family, which means he was the next relative to buy the family's fortune and marry a widow. He was to marry the widow, take on all their inheritance, and keep the family going, is what's supposed to be going on. The culture is to marry the widow and take care of the family and all its inheritance. And Boaz does this. Boaz, in the process of doing this, also found out that there was another relative who was closer in the family than he was. Mm-hmm. But he did things right, because we got to do it in decency and in order. So he went to the town, he sat with the elders, and he bought the property. He said he bought Ruth. And after doing that, found out that there was another man who was closer to the family. But this man found out that he would have to marry Ruth, who was a Moabite woman. And I guess in his eyes, she wasn't a good one. She wasn't a good lady. So he passed on that. And in the end, Boaz and Ruth get married, have their own baby, and they start their new lineages. Their own, y'all get the word. Out of this story, there are three things that you can take from this loyal love story. One, let's rest in the mighty hand of God. The mighty hand of God touches everything in this book. The lesson Ruth is giving us is that God is at work in every circumstance. When Naomi went back home, as you know, the Bible is such a beautiful way, the way to keep words and stuff. Naomi means beautiful. When she became a widow, when she went back home, she says, call me Mara, which means bitter. This lady has lost her husband and her two kids. How would you feel? Bitter. Would you think the Lord was still on your side? In this chapter, we don't hear a lot about what the Lord does, but you hear them talk about the Lord in this chapter. His invisible hand steers us according to his good purpose, whether we see it or not. Ruth went through some rough times, but every problem, every question, the uncertainty and brokenness became God's way of doing something better than could have happened otherwise. We find the beginning of God's grace when we come to the end of ourselves. Messiah family and friends, even when we are completely unaware of what is happening or even why something is happening, God is guiding your decision and actions. He is. Nilani was on my line this morning. He is working everything together for your good and his ultimate glory. We are to surrender to his sovereignty. Have you surrendered yourself? Do you trust his purpose for your life? Even when things look bleak, don't let the gloom keep you from seeing the glimpse of hope all around you. Two, cultivate your character. Ruth is a story of a God-saturated man, a God-dependent young woman, and a God-exalting older woman who don't cave into the temptations of their circumstances, but held fast to the right and trust in the Lord. Think about Naomi for a moment. While in a pagan land, she worshiped the true God when the entire culture around her bowed down to a Baal, which was a statue. She so lived thus before Ruth that Ruth trusted in her God. And even when despair had overshadowed her, Naomi never doubted that God was behind what was happening to her. Look at Ruth. Her love was shot through with loyalty, a virtue sadly missing in the negotiable not times of love in our time. She stayed with her mother-in-law when she didn't have to. She did not waver in the faith in one true God, even through her losses. She was industrious, humble, yet bold, willing to risk herself in her faith in God. Then there was Boaz, who didn't succumb to the power of many or the allures of the woman at his feet at midnight. He could have very well went into her, as they say. There are people, these are people of character. They paid the price in private in the day in and day out duties, developing habits and settling personal issues so that when the testing time came, their banner was clear and integrity sound. Lastly, just as Ruth saw reality in Naomi's religion and wanted it for herself, some of you are ready to receive the Redeemer into your life. Ruth and Orpah help us see options they both had. The opportunity to turn their backs on what they were worshiping and follow the true God. Orpah had started out to follow Naomi, but then bailed. Many of us do that. We start out and never make a commitment to Christ. You may see them in church for a couple of times, but then they vanish. God doesn't want a half-hearted commitment. He's looking for people today who will say, your God will be my God. All right. Are you ready to do that? Amen.
Amen.